unbelievably nice things about Dan and Steve. It's the same thing, because these are two people that I care greatly about. When you look at each of their strengths and you look at their families, Steve is a father of 4 and a grandfather of 6. He has an ability that is unique in government, that he is kind of in some ways very much like Prime Minister Modi. You have the ability to have a vision and inspire this vision could be done. Then you have the patience to work with all the groups to what could be done and reinforce it. And so from a business person's point of view, I'm extremely proud of the friendship that we've formed. And I could go on and on about each of their backgrounds and use all 20 minutes to talk about it, but I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Both of these individuals are like myself. They enjoy the outdoors and fishing. They're people that you can trust. And while I said and really meant it about Prime Minister Modi, I trust him so much, I trust him with my life, I would with both of you as well. So we were just about to hit the first question, which I was going to give to Dan in terms of what's on your mind this evening, that when you look at everything you're doing, what excites you the most?
Well, I'll take a crack at this, but first I just want to thank you, John and Steve. And I'm not kidding, and I don't say this normally in settings in Washington, D.C. These are two of my favorite people, not just in D.C., but in the country. So I'm very honored to be here, and they're great. Thank you. They're great Americans who we've done a lot of work together and a lot of things. And I know you asked the big picture. I do want to tell just one story on the U.S. India relationship that was, to me, a really kind of special moment, kind of sent a chill down my spine. I had invited Ambassador Sarna, for our former Indian ambassador to the United States, to come to Alaska in 2017. And we hosted him in the summer. It was great. We had this great kind of agenda for him. And we had a reception at a friend of mine's home in Anchorage. Beautiful place overlooking Cook Inlet. You know, John comes up to Alaska quite a lot, so he understands. Just yes. Gorgeous. And we were both talking, and somebody asked me, well, you know, you have the Indian ambassador of the United States here. What's the vision? And I said, the vision is the world's biggest democracy and the world's oldest democracy have to do much more strategically together. That's the vision. Okay, and I'm not kidding. What happened next, probably only could happen in Alaska, maybe Montana. A bald eagle flew into this reception. It was an outdoor reception, and it was, if you've seen a bald eagle up close, they're huge, right? 6-7 foot wingspan. And it lands right on a tree above the ambassador's head. Now, you know the ambassador is a very tall guy, right? And I thought this bald eagle was going to kind of swoop in, and it just plotted there. And the whole place was like, whoa. So, and then at the end, they're like, hey, did you Alaskans cue that? Like, was that a cue? Is that how it works up here? So I think in the setting here, that's our goal. It's certainly my goal. We've been working on it for a long time. There's no one's working that issue harder than John Chambers. But to me, that is a really important goal that we should be continuing to pursue.
Steve, the same question, and understand these are very dear friends, and thank you for allowing me to call you both by your first name. The key things that are on your mind today, and then we'll begin to lay the groundwork for why the relationship between India and the U.S. is so important to you. But start with the big picture and then bring it back to that topic.
Sure. Well, thank you, and I'm glad I can call you John and not Mr. Chambers as well. John's been a hero of mine. I once upon a time was in the cloud computing business. As part of a startup, we took a company public and then sold to Larry Ellison once upon a time. Before that, I was with Procter & Gamble. And lived in China for 6 years, launching brands over there. We took my sweet wife, Cindy, now we've been married 37 years. We took 2 little ones over there with us as early expats, launching American brands there in China. And we came home with 2 more kids. We had 2 kids born in China. My son likes to say he was made in China, he says. So that was, he has a pretty good sense of humor. He's a scratch golfer and a good kid. But I just have so much appreciated, John, talking with you and just thinking strategically about what's going on in the world. And I'll say this about my very good friend, Dan Sullivan, that goes back. We were elected together back in 2014. But let me tell you something about Dan Sullivan. a colonel in the Marine Corps. My father was in the Marine Corps as well. And Dan, thanks for your service as well to our country in the United States Marine Corps. But this is a very important moment, John, I think globally, so important here that we have clarity around who the good guys are and how we want to perpetuate these relationships and strengthen these relationships. And the good guys are the United States and India. And it's very important to think about what we need to do with India is bring the Quad relationship closer and push away the BRIC side of this. We want India and the United States should be the very best of friends with the deepest relationship. And you look at by every metric strategically, and as John and I were chatting, I'd taken many visits into China, leading congressional delegation visits, senators there. In fact, I told Mike Pompeo one time, the only thing more dangerous than a senator who's never been to China is one who was there 10 years ago, because the rate of change going on in China. But the strategic pivot, the important role that India plays, as Dan just mentioned, the largest democracy in the world, the largest population in the world. My father, 85 years old, his life was saved by an Indian doctor at MD Anderson. I'm very, very thankful for that. I mean, we have more doctors coming from India than any other country. Grateful for what they do, not only their incredible expertise, but also their compassion in terms of the relationship that we've been able to build with this great doctor. So it's very personal as well, John, for me, as I see what's happening. And with what's going on in the world, it's very important right now that China is watching what we are doing with India, and that we draw this relationship into much, much closer quarters.
So Dan, maybe following on the China comment, you've just been over there, you focus very much on the armed services in our country. You were the only member of the armed services in the Senate until you retired recently on it. How do you view the relationship, and how important is India strategically to us, and maybe some of your takeaways from your recent trip to Asia?
So, John, I think, I think it's really important to recognize we're in this new era of authoritarian aggression that's led by Xi Jinping and Putin and the Ayatollahs in Iran and Kim Jong-un in North Korea. They're all working together, right? We know that. And they're not, and a lot of these countries are motivated by historical grievances. They take aggressive actions based on those. They have no compunction about invading their democratic neighbors. And I think this new era, it's really a return to the era of authoritarian aggression, is going to be with us for years and decades to come. And from the U.S. perspective, I think we need to face this with strategic resolve and confidence. And the reason we should have confidence is because our strategic advantages relative to these dictatorships are so significant. And one of them, one of the most important, is our network of allies that we have worked with for decades, based on the same values. And that's where I think the strategic relationship between the United States and India is so important, because we share the same values and we share the same strategic interests. I always like to mention, when you think about vulnerabilities of these dictatorships, one of the biggest is that they fear their own people. They fear their own people. Those dictators will never do what Prime Minister Modi just did, which is stand for elections and let the people choose. And the strategic interests, I think, between democracies, Steve mentioned the Quad, to me are something from the United States perspective, but I also believe India, it just makes strategic sense moving forward. I served in the Bush administration under Condoleezza Rice. I was one of her assistant secretaries of state, focusing on the economic, energy, finance, trade issues in the State Department. As a matter of fact, I just had lunch a couple days ago with Condi out at Stanford. And when you look at what the Bush administration did, that was really in many ways a a kind of turning point in the U.S. India relationship with the U.S. India civil nuclear agreement. Secretary Rice, of course, played a really important role on that. And then we did, during the Bush administration, launch the Quad. But that kind of took a little nap, I think, during the Obama years. The Trump administration tried to re-energize that. And the Biden administration, to its credit, has now moved that to the leader level. And to me, when you look at the biggest democracies in the Indo-Pacific and what we can do together, Australia, India, the United States, and Japan, it is a huge strategic imperative that I think we need to double down on. One of the big areas that I care a lot about as Alaska Senator is energy. Think about what we can be doing, just those 4 countries with regard to energy. All forms of energy, oil, natural gas, renewables, the high technology that goes into some of the renewable sector. That is another area that I've been pressing the Biden administration on. Hey, you need to deepen and broaden and make more concrete the relationship in the different areas of the Quad. And to me, energy is one that has enormous, enormous upside benefits. Just in the area of LNG, just think of that. The United States and Australia are 2 of the biggest exporters of LNG. Japan is one of the biggest importers. Clean burning American energy could do so much, I think, favorably with regard to India as it builds out its natural gas sector, which I think is really important. So these are just some ideas, but the key reason why the strategic relationship, from my perspective, is imperative but also gaining ground is at the end of the day we share the same values, and that's the most enduring relationships that you can have anywhere in the world.
You know, you've kind of touched on it, Dan, and Steve, I'm going to ask you to follow up any additions you'd like to make to the comments, but part of any political scenario is what does this mean to our local citizens? And we all understand the big picture. But when you think about it, you're explaining to the citizens of Montana, you come from a startup state. You've got more high-tech startups growing at a faster rate than almost any other state in the nation. You came with a business background, et cetera. But what does it really mean when you talk to citizens in Montana, why this relationship is important, but beyond the geopolitical issues, the economic growth issues?
Well, John, thank you. And if you ever watch the show Yellowstone or see what's going on TV, you're going to see why people want to move to Montana and Alaska. They're 2 beautiful places. And the best talent is going to want to live in the most beautiful places. And so suddenly you've got a place like Montana where our quality of life is becoming now an important way to attract and retain some of the best talent in the world, because you're just minutes away from some of the best fly fishing, some of the best hiking, some of the best mountain climbing, some of the best skiing in the United States. But when I come from a Montana perspective, our number 1 industry is agriculture. So we have this high-tech side of us now that is exciting, but agriculture is our largest economic driver. And so many of you may not know that Montana is the number 1 producer of pulse crops in the United States. And so we've been working with the Indian government about how do we reduce tariffs there to open up more trading opportunities for pulse crops. And I'm very pleased we had some great traction there. We now have a level playing field with other countries around the world as it relates to pulse crops. So that's a very tangible, important piece for Montana, because India is the number 1 consumer of pulse crops. We're the number 1 producer in the United States, so there's a natural place to work together. I'm very grateful that we made some tremendous progress after a visit there in India I made back in 2021. But pivoting back over on the tech side and the innovation side as well, I stepped back and I had this conversation with John a couple of years ago looking at STEM grads. You think about the innovation ecosystem that we've got to develop here within our countries to continue to lead the world in technology. Look at the bright future with AI and so forth. And I looked at, China graduates about 5 million STEM graduates. I'm a chemical engineer by degree, so I'm very pro-STEM. And I believe in it. I've lived it. But China is graduating 8 times more STEM grads than we are in the United States. Where in the world would we be best to partner to develop close relationship where there's a lot of STEM grads graduating? How about India, with about 3 million to 4 million STEM grads a year? So between the United States and India, our all-in STEM grads there are about equivalent to China, using some very rough numbers. And so I think that's an exciting part of what's happening. Look at a third of the Silicon Valley engineers are from India. They have Indian backgrounds. And so there's a natural, I think, relationship here that we can work together. When I was over in Delhi in 2021, we were at the U.S. Embassy. I had this phone with me. It's my smartphone. I've had this for 25 years, the same number, not the same phone, the same number. Back from my startup days in cloud computing, I've kept this same phone. It's the same phone that my grandkids FaceTime me on. But I was able to bring that with me to that evening at the Roosevelt House. This phone was with me at the Roosevelt House. Look, I can't bring this phone into China. That says a lot right there in terms of the trust and the relationship and why it's strategically very important that the United States and India continue to work together, of course, on the agriculture side, but also relates to developing the innovation ecosystem for the next 20, 25 years.
Dan, take us the next step. When you think about AI technologies, and I think as recently as 7 or 8 years ago, many of us would say China was going to lead in 15 of the top 20 technologies in the world, and I thought it was their hand to win. They've made a number of missteps with the comments that you and Steve have both made. If you look what our countries could do together, we could move with the speed that would guarantee us 1-2 spots in the world, but also really share with all of our citizens of individual states what could be done here. How do you think about that from a defense point of view? When you really look at how fast the technology is going to move, where is the U.S.? What do you feel best about? What do you feel that the U.S. and India need to do better?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, John. And we, on the Senate Armed Services Committee, we just marked up what's called the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. So that bill moves every year into Congress. That's 65 years in a row that bill, that'll be voted into law by the end of this year. So the Senate marked up its version. And to be honest, we have a lot of challenges on the military side, in my view, from the United States perspective. Look, I'm not going to be here to kind of dump all over the current administration, but they have not been, in my view, taken the defense component of our national security nearly seriously enough. President Biden has put forward 4 budgets in a row that are inflation-adjusted cuts to the Department of Defense. The current budget right now shrinks the Army, shrinks the Navy, shrinks the Marine Corps of the United States. That is the wrong direction, given the challenges that we see right now. To me, the good news that exists between the U.S.-India relationship on the defense side can cover the whole gambit of what we need in terms of technologies, but also what we need in terms of basic warfighting capability. First, and it's really interesting to see how this happened, but the combatant command that is the top joint forces for the United States used to be called the Pacific Command. In 2018, during the Trump administration, we officially renamed that Indo-Pacific Command. And I think that just woke up a lot of people in the United States saying, wait a minute, this isn't just PACOM, as we called it, this is Indo-PACOM, because of India, because of the strategic importance of India.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So we are now doing much more military exercises between the United
Tuesday.
States and India's military.
I don't have anything off the top.
One area that I've been really
Like a
focused
kickoff.
on, where we need help. We need help. The United States has to do a much better job.
Sources said the strike was
Our
targeting
Navy
Hezbollah
is shrinking.
commander.
Our
Was this an
ability to
Israeli
produce
strike, as far as
Navy
you're aware?
warships
I don't have any
has
updates
atrophied.
on
We have a
any specific
huge
activity that
crisis
we're seeing.
in not only
so on
Navy
this specific
shipbuilding,
incident, I would have
but
to refer
Navy
you to
maintenance
partners in the region
of
to speak
ships.
to.
Has
And
Israel
what
been
has
in
been
touch
happening
with you prior
is,
to this about
you know,
any potential
normally
upcoming
for
strike?
the U.S. Navy
we have
ships
been
to
in
get
continuous
heavy-duty
discussions with
maintenance,
Israeli and Lebanese
they come back
counterparts
to the
since
United
incident
States.
over
Well,
the
a number
weekend,
of
and the
us
United
have
States
been
is going
saying,
to continue
wait
to
a minute,
support efforts
if we
to
have
reach a
U.S. Navy
diplomatic
ships
solution
in the
along the blue
Indo-PACOM
line
region,
that
why
our
can't
hope
they
is
get
will
heavy-duty
end these terrible
maintenance
attacks
with our
and again
allies
allow Israeli and
in their
Lebanese citizens
shipyards?
on both sides of the border
And
to
that is
safely return
something
home.
that
That's going
actually in this
to
bill,
continue to remain our
we're
focus and
authorizing
goal.
more to
And
do.
have they given you any
And we
warning
had a
that they would
couple
strike Beirut
U.S.
if
Navy
this was an
ships
attack?
that
I'm just not going to
recently
get into
went through
specific
maintenance
diplomatic
in
discussions,
India.
and I'll leave it to Israelis
And that is a
to
smart
speak
idea
to
with
any
our
planning or
allies,
response
right? It makes sense.
that they may have in the works.
And
So
we
that's
reported
one
that the
area,
US was
and then
working
the
with Israel
other
not to
area
strike
that I
Beirut.
think is
Do you
really
feel
exciting, and
that,
Steve already mentioned
this
it.
could escalate tensions if this is an
kind of
Israeli
out of my
strike?
league
and are you
here
concerned about
talking in
repercussions?
between
So
two
I'm
of
going
the
to echo a little
smartest
bit what I
tech
said
guys in the
yesterday, which
country.
is that our support
But it is in
for
this area of
Israel's
technology.
security is
We
ironclad
have
and it's unwavering,
seen, and I think
especially
it's an
as it
exciting
defends
comparative
itself against
advantage again we have in
Iran-backed
the United
threats,
States.
including
We
threats
now
from
have a tech
Hezbollah.
community
No nation could be
that is
expected to
very
tolerate the
interested
kinds
in
of
helping with
threats that
regard
Israel
to our
is facing
military.
and continues to face.
Now,
But at
some
the
of you
same
know, 10
time,
years
you
ago, that
heard,
wasn't the case.
Admiral
We had
Kirby
a lot
say
of
this
folks in
yesterday, as
Silicon
well as
Valley
myself, that
who
we
were in the
do not
tech
believe
industry,
that
tech
all-out
finance, who
war
were
is
kind of
inevitable,
saying,
and we
hey,
still believe that it
Pentagon, we're not
can be
interested in
avoided,
helping
and
you.
we're continuing to work
You know,
towards
my view on that
a
was it's a
diplomatic
free country.
resolution that would allow
You can do
Israeli
whatever
and
you want,
Lebanese
but you
civilians
shouldn't be
to
helping
return
the
to their homes and
Chinese
live in peace
and
and
not
security.
your own
We certainly
home
want
country.
to avoid
That's changed.
any kind of
And we
escalation,
have
and that is
so many
exactly why we
opportunities
continue to
now
remain so
with
deeply
tech
focused
companies who
on
want to make
diplomacy.
sure our ability
go
to
ahead.
Is the U.S.
protect
prepared to
ourselves from a
back
national
Israel if
security
it does
perspective,
devolve
to have
into a
lethal
full-fledged
military
war?
forces.
I'm just not
is
going to
starting
get
to have
into
a lot
hypotheticals
of
beyond
interest.
saying
It's a
that our
huge
commitment to
comparative
Israel's
advantage we
security
have
is
over
ironclad
China,
and
over
unwavering, and the
Russia.
threat that Israel
But we need
faces
to do it with our
from
other
Hezbollah is
tech-savvy
very
allies.
real, as
And I
real
think
as
doing
the
that
events that we
with
saw
India,
unfold this
particularly in
weekend.
the technology
But
space that
our
relates
focus
to national
continues to be
security,
on diplomacy.
AI,
We continue to
quantum
believe that
computing
diplomacy
is
is
a
the
natural-
best path forward. We think that
next
is
step
the best
that
way
we all
right
should be
now
working on.
to calm
Steve,
tensions
I know
along the
that
blue
you've got to
line
make
and create
another
conditions that will
commitment,
allow
and,
civilians to
I've
return
taken
home.
up
That's our
more of your time
focus.
than
Is
I
it still
asked
your
for, but
assessment
I'd
that
love
both sides do
both
not
of
want
your
to see this
closing
devolve
thoughts.
into a full-fledged conflict?
Perhaps
I'm not
first
going
of all,
to
where do you
speak
see this
for
relationship
I'm not
10
going to
years
speak
from
for
now?
the other entities.
And
It's certainly the
then
United
secondly,
States'
maybe ask the audience,
perspective and
well,
point of
give us
view.
constructive feedback
Like I
on what
said,
you think we
and
can do
you
better
saw the
in
Secretary of
affecting
Defense and the
interfacing
Secretary
our
of State
government
speak to
to
this a
India,
little bit on their
getting our
travels.
messages out. Your
We
thoughts?
do not believe that
First
an
of all,
all-out war is
thank you,
inevitable,
John,
and we
and I
believe
think
that it
the-
can be avoided, and
the
that's exactly
story
why
of
we're
India was
remaining
going as an
focused on
undertold story.
diplomacy.
And I want
I
to
think
follow
we
up
need
on
to
my
get out
question from
there and tell
yesterday
the
on
story
AMSIPs who
of
are
what's
in
going
Lebanon. Are there
on
any
in India. I think
changes
there
in
are
potential
perceptions
evacuation for these
of India
folks? Any
that,
outreach to them
are
to
not
see if they
aligned
need
with the
assistance,
reality of
anything
what's
like that?
happening.
No change in posture
When I
to
come
report,
back
Jenny.
from my
Again,
visits to
our
India,
travel
it's
advisory
been
warning for the
jaw-dropping,
totality
truly,
of the
to
country
see
continues to
the
be at a
incredible
level
amount of
3,
innovation
with
going
Southern
on,
Lebanon being at a
world-class.
level 4.
And
There are a
I
number
think
of steps that
maybe to
American
sum it
citizens
all up,
can take. They can
what
enroll in
India
Smart
has
Traveler to stay in
and the
touch
United
with our
States have,
American
as Dan talked
Citizen
about
Services
comparative
team and the
advantage.
consular team
You always look
there.
at what's the
They can also
sustainable
take a look
comparative
at
advantage that allows you
what
to
commercial
win
options may
medium and
exist
long
for their
term.
safe departure.
And I
Commercial
think what
options are
sets
still available,
our
and they
two
continue to be
countries apart,
the best
first
way
of all, is
for
just the
those
incredible
who
amount
currently may
of-
be
of
interested in
talent,
leaving
just
the
the-
region.
the, you
But
know,
beyond
the
that,
human capital
we
is
are
the most
constantly
important capital
assessing
of
safety
any-
and
of any
security
nation.
circumstances on the
The fact
ground,
is, there's
and we will
incredible
certainly update
human
those
talent in India
whenever
and the United
that
States.
is
But what
prudent
sets
and
us
appropriate,
apart
and will
from
appropriately
maybe
be in touch
challenge
with
with China is
American
India
citizens when we need
and
to.
the United States are free.
Wait, hold on, Ms. Vedant.
Yeah.
Does the
We have the rule of
Department
law.
believe that the Israeli
share the
government would
common
agree to a
values of
ceasefire deal
democracy.
in Gaza while engaging
That
in
is
kinetic
what
activity
allows
in
the
northern Lebanon?
innovation ecosystem
I'm just
to
not going to
long-term
speculate
win.
or
Allows us to succeed in thinking about the
speculate the
global challenges
sequencing
is Dan
as it
mentioned,
relates to these kinds
think
of
about,
things.
BRICS.
First and
Talking
foremost,
about
as it relates
Russia,
to a ceasefire in Gaza, you
China,
heard me talk a little bit about
Iran
this yesterday.
are players there.
We
This is
think
a
that it can
moment in the
unlock a lot
world
of things. First
with
and foremost,
tyrants on the rise,
create
where we
conditions
need
for
moral
the remaining
clarity.
hostages, including
And
Americans,
for the
to be
good
returned home.
guys to
Create
be getting
conditions for the
closer
influx
together.
of additional
If you think of what's
humanitarian
at
aid
stake
to
right
address the
now for,
situation in
as I
Gaza.
said, as
It also
grandfather
can
of
create the
6
conditions for
little
broader
grandchildren, you
diplomacy
think a
to
lot
take
about
place
their
to get this
futures.
region out of
I'm
the endless
optimistic
cycle of violence. We
about where
also
capital will continue to
believe that
go,
a
exchanging
ceasefire
different
and a
countries.
hostage deal
And
in
let's not
Gaza
forget here in the United
can
States, we
accelerate
have
the
a
possibility of
healthcare
progress,
shortage.
including
We
lasting
don't have enough
security and
doctors.
along the Israeli-Lebanese border, and that's why we're going to continue to remain focused on that. But
there,
I just don't want to
number one
speculate on
source of-
sequencing, and I
of
certainly don't want to
doctors
speak for other
are coming
countries.
from India.
Sure, it's
They're
less
some of the best
speculation.
in the world.
I mean,
And
the
that's something I'm
secretary's
grateful
readout with the
for.
Egyptian forum
Thanks,
just stressed the
My
same,
pleasure.
that a
Dan, bring us
ceasefire
up.
agreement
Well,
can lead to a diplomatic resolution.
Absolutely.
in Lebanon.
There's a
But
lot of
what I'm
discussion
asking
on
is whether
the
you've had
issue
an
of
indication
values,
from
and
the
I think
Israelis that
it's the critical
that
strategic
is in the
forces
realm of possibility,
gonna
or whether they
continue to
believe that
make
it is
the
important first
US
to
India
retaliate fully
relationship
against
converge
Hezbollah
even more.
before they
And I think
consider making a
that's-
deal with Hamas.
We have to
Look,
work
I'm
on
not
it.
going to
You know,
speak
India,
for other
sometimes,
countries and
the
actors in the
government
region.
can
I'm not
say, hey, we
a
don't want to be
spokesperson
aligned
for
with
them.
anybody.
What
There's
I
a long
can say
history
is that
there.
from
We
the
know that.
United
We
States
have to be
perspective,
respectful
we
of that. But I think the
think that
values just
diplomacy
drive,
is the best path forward
the
here. We are
strategic
focused on
interests.
that, engaging with
The thing that I
officials in
get
Israel
excited about
and Lebanese
as an
officials
American
on reaching a diplomatic
is the
solution
other thing
along
that I
the blue
think
line.
will drive
Most
the
important to
strategic
us
interest
is
is when
creating
you
the
look at the
conditions so
American
civilians
Indian
can return
community.
home, and simultaneously we're
senior White
continuing
House
to pursue
officials
every
who you're
effort
gonna hear
as it
from here in a
relates to a
second.
ceasefire and hostage
And
deal
you're-
in Gaza, because not only
you
is that
have,
beneficial for
people
Gaza and
in terms
Israel
of
in the
Nikki Haley
immediate sense,
running
but
for
also we
president,
believe that it has
maybe a
potential
vice
in the
president.
north
I mean,
as well.
you look
You've already
at
mentioned
the
today the
source
U.S.'s ironclad
of the
commitment to Israel's defense. Secretary
strength
Austin,
in the
speaking
rising
overseas,
of this
said
great
pretty much the
community in our own
same.
country.
Has Israel
You know, I just
specifically
retired from the
requested
Marine
through State
Corps after
Department
30
channels
years.
a sort of
One of the,
unconditional commitment to assist should it
speakers at my
struggle
retirement
militarily
ceremony
against
was
in
a
a second
one-star
front?
general.
Well, our
Ball and I are, some of you
commitment
know
to
Ball and
no
top
country
guy
is
in the
ever
US Air Force,
unconditional.
youngest
Let's
one-star.
remember that.
I
But
served
first and
under him in
foremost,
Afghanistan.
our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad. It's
and now he's
ironclad in
the
the
CEO of a
context of any
really
threat that it
prominent
faces
tech
from
AI company.
the
I mean, it's
Iranian regime
everywhere.
itself
And I think
or
that is
malign proxy
also,
groups like Hezbollah.
this
We, of
great
course, and we spend a lot of
Indian-American
time in this
community is
free
gonna
room
be a
talking
key
about it, have
source
a
of
robust,
continuing to drive
long-standing security
strategic
relationship
relationship
with the
between the
government of
United
Israel,
States and
and
India
we
even
continue
closer.
to support
And
them
it's
in
just
their
very,
efforts to
very
defend themselves,
exciting.
whether that be
I want to thank you
defending
both. Please
themselves
join
from
me in welcoming, I
the
think, two of our great senators.
actors who
Thanks a lot,
undertake
everybody.
October 7th
Steve,
terrorist attacks, or other malign groups like Hezbollah, or even from the Iranian regime directly, as we saw in April.
I don't want to wordsmith or nitpick, but you said ironclad but not unconditional. Can you explain a little bit what that means?
Well, the point that I'm making is that we, of course, when it comes to any country in which we have a security relationship with, we, of course, expect that the provision of U.S. defense articles, the provision of U.S. security articles are utilized in consistent